It's a privilege for two reasons. One, it's one of the rare few spaces left where people can converse openly and freely. Coming from Delhi, I know the space there is crunched a lot, so I'm glad that I found some refuge in Hyderabad. There's a personal pleasure that my elder brother stays. He came to this city 14 years ago and refuses to leave your city, so I'm drawn to it every time. This is what I propose to do. While there is this conversation about how transparent the electoral bonds are and what we found about them, we should also converse and imagine what should be good electoral funding in a democracy. What is the basic principles on which electoral funding should run? What would allow governance to be better? So let's start with that and imagine what an ideal electorally funded process would be. To my view, two or three things should be very simple, and I think most of us would agree to. That our elected representatives should be answerable to nobody but us as citizens who vote. They should not be answerable, certainly not to a foreign entity. They should only be answerable to us as citizens, human beings, and not be answerable to corporates, should not be answerable to unknown trusts, should not be answerable to any other illegally formed but artificial entity. Only those who vote should be able to hold them accountable. To that end, it makes sense to say that nobody else but we as citizens who vote for our elected representatives should also fund them in some way or the other. Nobody else should provide them funds, but obviously it's understandable that anyone who provides beyond the citizens provides funds to the electoral process is not doing it out of a gratuitous nature. They are doing it because they hope to reap some benefit out of it in case the horse they bet on comes back winning. So a clear principle ideally should be that only the citizens should be able to provide funds to the candidates they want to the parties they want to, and obviously that only we therefore vote also and select and elect those who are. There's another side to this of saying, what kind of parties do we provide funds to? Who do we support? Now, there are established parties, historically large, established national parties, as we might call them. Whether they remain national or not is one thing, but at least we call them national parties. They're regional large parties. The basic principle of electoral funding again, in my view, should be that there should be a sense of equality and equity in how resources are available to anyone who wants to set up a political party. It might be a small community wanting to have its own representation, which it feels aggrieved upon that the mainstream parties are not working. That small group should also have an equal opportunity to source funds from the citizens as much as, say, a big party like BJP or Congress does. So the two fundamental principles that one has, to my view, is simple. One, that we should be the only ones as citizens providing funds, and then anyone which wants a political formation to come into electoral processes should have equal opportunities to access those funds, however much they might be. Now, these ideals have remained ideal even for the last 60, 70 years. It's not what we've followed. This is what we've followed till 2017. We had a process which allowed parties to collect up to rupees 20,000 rupees in cash and not account for where they had got it from. Anything above that would have to be brought in as a check or a demand draft. The party would have to disclose annually to the Election Commission how much they had collected above 20,000 and from whom. The company which gave the money, and this was an important condition, and we'll come back to this later, the company, particularly if it gave any money to a political party, was not allowed to give more than 7.5% of the net profit it had earned on average in the last 3 years. And it had to say whom it had given money to. There were a couple of reasons for this, and I'm sure you can think through that. Only a company that is making profit should be giving money. Otherwise, you'll have shell companies, fraudulent companies, whose only purpose is to funnel money into politics and other reasons, clean money which is actually dirty, would get into the business. So this limit was put that 7.5% seems reasonable. You should be making profits for considerable number of years, and you'll provide a certain amount of that profit, because if you're providing more than a little amount, clearly it's for other motives than just providing funds because you think political processes in India should be helped. How did it really work? It worked insidiously. Most parties, what they did was a trick. They took donations from everyone in amounts less than 20,000. So they would take bulk amount of so-called donations in amounts less than 20,000, and therefore would not need to even reflect them in their accounts to the public. Therefore, say till 2017, more than 50% of the funds that BJP got, while it was not getting much at that time compared to today, 50% of its funds came from unaccounted cash. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and my numbers would be somewhere in the right range, even if they're not completely accurate, somewhere around 40% of Congress's money also came in cash. Because against cash, if you said you get below 20,000 and millions of them supposedly paying below 20,000, you will not have to inform citizens like us where you got it from. Then there was a process of electoral trusts which were coming up. Electoral trusts could come together, a couple of corporates could come together, provide money to an electoral trust. The trust would give it to a few parties again, but the parties would have to disclose that these trusts have given money, and the trust would also have to do so. In 2017, and this is where the story gets interesting, somewhere in February 22nd or 23rd of 2017, this we discovered obviously 2 years later when we got hold of the documents. A small junior officer in the finance ministry woke up on Friday and realized there's a crisis a few days before the budget is to be presented. Sorry, this is January. February 1st, the budget was presented. And he wrote an email, a 2-line email to his seniors saying that electoral bond thing that we're going to create needs us to amend the Reserve Bank of India Act. And we forgot about it. The officer wrote to his senior, as it always happens in government, there's a file that runs up or down all the while. The second officer said, yes, oops, we forgot about it. We should talk to RBI about it. So on Friday evening, 2-3 days before the budget was to be presented, a 3-line email was sent to the RBI saying we are going to amend your act, which governs how the RBI functions, how does the banking in India function, how money markets in India work, how currency works. Now, any one of you who's dealt with government or stayed in government, you know governments don't work on Saturdays and Sundays. Particularly, the RBI clearly doesn't. But the RBI was so alarmed that on Saturday itself, it sent an email back to the finance ministry saying, please don't do it. It said it had 3 reasons. It had 1, this is not transparent. 2, this is actually opening electoral funding to black money. It referred to the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, whose job is to prevent any money being whitewashed into the system. And 3, it says you are taking away the key role that till date has only been held by RBI, which is to create currency. Anything equivalent of a bond which can be transacted, moved around like a bearer check, is equivalent of a currency, and till date only the Reserve Bank of India has the powers to do it. You are taking away that power and giving it to yourself, and you're promising that you might give it to someone X also when you wish to. Now, one would think these are serious, reasonable concerns that a government might think about before it goes ahead. The response of the government on Saturday evening itself was very simple. It said, it's too late, we have already published our budget. And that was its only response to the RBI. On Monday, it went ahead and the then Finance Minister Arun Jaitley presented to the Parliament what is called the electoral bonds. And it was a fascinating exposition of duplicity, where he started by saying the reason I'm bringing this and tabling this before Parliament is because we believe electoral funding requires transparency. And in the next paragraph, he said, because electoral funding requires transparency, I'm bringing these electoral bonds which will remain secret. They will be secret insofar as no citizen of the country, no entity, no statutory organization, no constitutional authority, nobody will ever come to know who gives money to whom. It will be done secretly. And he, on the floor of the House, claimed it was being done because some donors have come to it and said they fear donating to political parties because if the opposition comes into power, they might threaten us. So donors had told Mr. Jaitley and the government, Mr. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government, that we'd like secret bond or secret processes of funding political parties. And therefore, in the name of transparency, the secrecy was established. This was not the only thing that was done around the same days. About 20 days later, the government, as we come to know from records, also turned around a few other laws. It did away with the cap of 7.5% profit. Remember that the companies had to adhere to if they were donating. They could not donate more than 7.5% of their net profits. The government did away with this. It also did away with two other provisions in different laws. One was where political parties needed to say which companies they had got money from. Now the amended act said the companies can only say the lump sum amount they have given, but they don't need to tell whom they have given this amount to, particularly if it is given through electoral bonds. They amended a fourth piece of legislation where they said the parties also do not have to give the names of the companies and individuals and trusts and NGOs who might donate to them, particularly through electoral bonds. And it also amended this provision saying 20,000 rupees cash provision. It reduced that to 2,000 rupees, saying not more than 2,000 rupees should be provided as cash. If you remember, this was done through a process called the money bill, which means it did not need the approval of the Rajya Sabha. All these approvals were taken only from the Lok Sabha, where the BJP government obviously had enough numbers. Days passed, and as records show, fascinatingly, while the government was very clear that it needed something like electoral bonds, which was secret, it never knew what they were really going to do and how they would really operate. It was only after March 2017, when the parliament had cleared the electoral bonds, that the government began to think, now how will they function? How will they really operate? And they started discussing internally, saying we must have some amount of secrecy. We must have these money flowing very smoothly, and let's talk amongst each other at that time. Now, somewhere around May, if I'm not mistaken, or it may be August, I'm forgetting the month, the Election Commission, which had never been asked about this entire process, woke up to what had happened. And these were early days when Election Commission is not the Election Commission of today. They wrote a long 4-page missive to the Law and Justice Ministry saying there's a plethora of processes that we wanted reformed in the electoral funding thing, which would bring transparency. Instead, you have brought this, and this does 4 things in the Election Commission's view. One, it injects black money into politics. 2, in the name of transparency, I'm almost telling you verbatim, the documents are in public domain, you could go back and read them later. Almost in the name of transparency, it provides complete opaqueness. 3, and this bit I forgot to tell you, that it allows foreign entities to also flush funds into Indian elections. And 4th, it says this is disastrous. The government took this on record and forgot it. It did not even respond to the Election Commission. Officially, it claimed the letter had been lost. This is literally, quite literally, what the government claimed, said that letter was lost. Obviously, later it was found out when required. The government started discussing this and told the RBI, now it's fait accompli. We've already got it in place. We will now clear this. Tell us how to run it. The RBI, strangely for the government, the new governor in place, Urjit Patel, who'd been nominated by this government against the previous one that the government had found great problems with, also somehow developed what I would call a little spine and wrote back and saying, we will not allow this. We are not in favor of this. We've repeatedly warned you. This will inject black money into politics. This will create trouble for the currency in the currency markets in India. And this, for all several reasons that we've stated before, is not a good idea. The government on its record, while receiving these missives directly from the governor of RBI, wrote on his record, the RBI has agreed with us and we will go ahead with the electoral bonds. Now, in normal course, in normal times, if a government officer wrote this, it would be called a misrepresentation of facts and you could be prosecuted for this. But these are not normal times as we understand. The government suddenly was in panic. The only place where they could, these bonds could be run now was saying they'll not run it. So the government turned to the State Bank of India and said, you run the scheme. The SBI said, we don't know how to run this scheme. They said, we'll tell you how to run the scheme. So they devised the scheme. Now, in middle of this, they also wanted to keep a little pretense of having consulted different people. So they wrote to the political party saying, we've already cleared this electoral bonds. We'd like to have your views on it. The Congress I wrote and said, we are completely opposed to it on principles. We should never have something like this. One of its own allies, the Akali Dal, wrote and said, you know, this idea of taking the limits away from the corporate sounds dubious. Let's not do that. Imagine an ally of this government saying it, being worried about it, and actually writing it down. Couple of other parties said, you know, you've told us that there's this thing called the electoral bond, but what is it? How does it function? Would you let us know before you ask for our opinion? Several parties wrote this. There was one party which wrote and said, this is a brilliant deal. Guess. The BJP. The BJP wrote a long list of things how it should function. And as it would happen, that's exactly how the electoral bonds ended up functioning. So this is how they function. There would be 4 windows opened in a year for 10 days where anyone could go to an SBI branch, designated branch in a capital in a state, buy this bond. The bond would be worth, I think if I'm not mistaken, 10 rupees, 1,000 rupees, a lakh, 10 lakh and 1 crore denomination. So it's almost like a certificate, which the government said would be anonymized in the sense that if you bought it, your name would not on be it. No political party's name would be on it. You would just buy it from one branch, go and give it to the political party. The political party would put it in its own account, and against that, the State Bank of India would give the political party equivalent amount of cash. Now, there was a beautiful part that the BJP leader who wrote the letter in response to the government saying, how should the electoral bonds function? The BJP leader said, the electoral bonds are very important because we have so many people spread across villages and countries who want to contribute money to us. So we'd like that these certificates are available to all of them to contribute small amounts to us from all over the country. It makes sense. I mean, a cadre-based big party should logically ask for it. We'll come back to this narrative later. Now, it was to be sold in 4 windows in a year of 10 days each, encashed within 15 days. Within those 15 days, I could buy it, I could give it to X, X could give it to Y, and Y could give it to a political party. Once it was deposited, it would be encashed with the political party. In the year that there were general elections to be held for the Lok Sabha, in this case, obviously 2019, the recent vintage, in that year, the central government could allow a 30-day extra sale of these electoral bonds. Obviously, Lok Sabha is a serious, much larger episode, and therefore money is required by political parties. So far, seems pretty okay. The first tranche of this electoral bonds, therefore, were opened in 2018. Legally, they were supposed to be opened in the month of January. Illegally, they were opened in the month of March. The very beginning of this process, you forget whether electoral bonds is a good idea or a bad idea. You can mull about it later. But the rules that the government itself had set in complete secrecy were broken from the day one when the electoral bonds were sold in a month that they should not have been sold, in the month of March. But in 2018, if you remember, Karnataka was going to go into elections in the month of May. And then an officer in his file wrote that the Prime Minister's office has asked us to sell these bonds and let parties purchase these bonds even for assembly elections just before assembly elections. A senior officer responded and said, that's illegal. A third officer responded on top of that, said, I agree it's illegal. The fourth senior most officer responded and agreed it is illegal and said, but maybe this time we can break the law. I mean, the terminology you used was, let us have an exception this time. Now, anyone who's dealt with any law, you cannot, as average citizens, get exceptions to the law if you kill somebody, even have a traffic challan. But here, the finance minister approved what the PMO, and in Indian parlance, I'll come back to this, what the Prime Minister's office has said, break the law to sell these bonds. The finance minister said, yes, as an exception, we'll break the law and sell these bonds. Now, the way Indian government works in our file systems, when the Prime Minister orders something, it is always written as the Prime Minister's office. This is a heritage that we've traveled with to make sure that the Prime Minister can never be put under the watch for what he or she might have done. So when you read PMO said something, clearly there's only one boss in the PMO. There's no second boss in the PMO. So the PMO, and that's the only thing I can say, and you can read the rest into it, the PMO ordered an illegal sale of electoral bonds a month before the Karnataka elections. It was approved as an exception. Fine, let's presume in strange democracies, prime ministers are allowed to break laws once as an exception. But then you remember in 2018 and there were certain other assembly elections that were coming to fore. This time we don't know where the instructions came from, but the finance ministry wrote this, and this is almost poetic, said because we have broken the law once as an exception, let's break it every time now. And said let's keep selling because we've already broken the law. So let's keep selling. We have been instructed, we don't know where, but we know that they were instructed. And they broke the law and sold the bonds yet again before the assembly elections. Was this the only time the government broke its own laws? We have now come far away from the fact that whether electoral bonds is good or bad. That we've already forgotten. We are pointing to saying, let's give it up and say, let's live with it. Are they even working by their rules? Somewhere around May, just before the Karnataka election, this illegal sale of bonds, we found another fascinating file. And I'll later come to how these files came about and who was critical to getting them out. It wasn't us as journalists. The State Bank headquarters in Delhi sends a 2-line email to the SBI chairman in Bombay and says, you know, these couple of fellows have come to us. They have these 10 crore worth of bonds which are expired. If you remember, they can only last 15 days after they've been bought, but they've expired. But these chaps are saying they have to encash it and it has to be encashed. Now, in a day, roughly the SBI deals with around 47,000 to around 60,000 crores worth of transactions. So 10 crores worth of transactions for anything is really not what a chairman usually spends his day bothered about in SBI. But here the Delhi headquarters sent an email to the SBI chairman in Bombay. The SBI chairman within hours opened that email and forwarded it to the finance ministry and said, what do we do about it? Now you know the answer to this, but let me say it for rhetorical purposes. The finance ministry said this is illegal. And then what did it say? Let's do it as an exception regardless. So this email was sent back the same evening. This is still within banking hours. The email goes back to the SBI chairman. The SBI chairman sends an email back to the SBI headquarters in Delhi. And whoever those two gentlemen were, their 10 crores worth of bonds were encashed while they were illegal. Now, I'm presuming, I believe my readers are always, and my audience is always intelligent. It's easy to guess which party those bonds belong to. They clearly did not belong to anyone they should not have belonged to. Was this the only time that the government acted illegally, even on the egregious rules that it had created? Somewhere in between, because of an interpret transparency activist, Commodore Lokesh Batra, who's really the force behind all these investigations that we did, because it was his effort over a year and a half, along with others' help, to bring out all these documents through RTI. This was his beginning when he was getting a smell of something going on. He filed the first few RTIs and got a response saying the Election Commission has also opposed these bonds. The information reached the Member of Parliament. The Member of Parliament put a question in the Parliament saying, has Election Commission ever opposed this? The government said no. So then Commodore Lokesh Batra filed another RTI, got a copy of the Election Commission's letter and said, but Election Commission wrote this. Then the government came back to the Parliament. This is on the floor of the House in written. And the government said, oh yeah, that letter got lost. They said, but no, it didn't get lost. Commodore Batra is this, what journalists should be. He's this crazy man who goes after things and doesn't relent. He filed another RTI, got proof that that letter had never got lost. In fact, it had been distributed to all the departments of the Finance Ministry. All 18 of them had it, including the Finance Minister's office. And he said, well, so the Member of Parliament then filed a privilege notice against the Finance Minister on the floor of the House. Normally, a privilege notice is a serious affair. In most governments, it's been a serious affair. The government came back and lied yet again, even to a privilege notice. And said, yeah, we got this, but it wasn't exactly what you thought. Because you asked, did they convey any concerns to you? They did not convey any concerns to us. They just wrote a letter to us. And I'm actually not paraphrasing. This is roughly close to what is written in government files. By May 2019, when the general elections were over, 6,200, if I'm not mistaken, 71 crores worth of electoral bonds had been sold. Now, to give you a rough figure, we've got used to such big scams, we don't remember what these figures are worth. 6,200 is roughly 3 times the total amount of money the government spent last year supposedly to save environment. The total budget allocation for the Environment Ministry is 2,000 crores. It's half the amount spent on providing food to children across the country for the midday meal scheme. 6,200 crores worth of electoral bonds had been sold. We know for the first tranche, which was, if you remember, March 2018, 222 crores was sold. 96% of that had gone to one party. I do not need to name the party. In 2018 and 19, that one party, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP, and let's say it openly rather than be coy about it, had got more money through electoral bonds than all the other parties put together. There is still more unaccounted for, which we'll come to know a year later. The RBI through this process kept on writing saying, what are you doing? The Election Commission also kept on doing it. The government on its record kept on saying, both have agreed with us. More than 90% of these bonds were in denominations purchased above 10 lakhs. More than 60% of these bonds were in denominations of 1 crore and up. Now, go back to that letter that the BJP leader had written saying, our followers all over the villages want to give small donations. Unless BJP's idea of what small donations is very different than everyone else's. We clearly know you and I as average citizens, even if we run small businesses, are really not keen, even if I had an uncle, a cousin or a brother in a political party, to donate to him or her 1 crore rupees for the heck of it. Now in 2017 itself, when the idea had just formulated, Sitaram Yechury and his party went to the Supreme Court and filed an application against it, based saying this is unconstitutional, etc., etc. In 2018, ADR, NCPRI, and others went to court and filed applications saying this is illegal, unconstitutional, crazy, etc., etc. And then in 2019, based on the investigations we had done and the Commodore papers that we had, all of them went back to the court and filed the new evidence saying it's not just unconstitutional. Even within that supposed constitutionality, they have broken laws to sell this. We now have proof this is only a way for one party to get enough money. And we'll come back to why it happens like that. The Supreme Court, I'm presuming you knew what it did on the matter. The gentleman shaking his head rightly, it did nothing. It just sat on the case in 2017. In 2018, it responded by saying, let all parties file details of who they've got money from and give it to Election Commission in sealed covers. A new level of jurisprudence that we've hit in the last few years. The sealed covers, I don't think all parties have even filed that with the Election Commission. The Election Commission does not even tell that. Whatever information lies there has been sitting there. Yesterday, the Supreme Court heard the case afresh on just the stay, not even the substantive matters, and said, let's hold another hearing after 2 weeks. Why? Because right now the electoral bond window is still open for the Delhi elections. It will end on 22nd, tomorrow. This will be the 13th, the 14th, or 13th or 14th tranche. Sorry, I'm forgetting that. Now, when Sitaram Yechuri filed the petition in the Supreme Court, the government initially got hassled, saying, I don't know whether they understood how well they had the Supreme Court mapped out. I think they panicked a little and said, we might actually need to defend this argument now. So they hired a lawyer. Commodore Lokesh Batra is quite spectacular. He filed an RTI asking the government to disclose what was the discussions between it and the government on the case it was going to be filed, defending in court. Now, under the constitutional, any one of you who's lawyer will know that a client-lawyer communication is privileged and cannot be disclosed to anyone. Disclosure of that is actually illegal unless the client says it can be disclosed. In this case, the government gave it to us under RTI. Some of the craziest things the government does when it thinks is really watertight. It gave us the documents, and the lawyer that they had first consulted had a simple line to give it back to them. He said, it's unconstitutional. What happened to the lawyer? Obviously, he was chucked out, another one was brought in. The next lawyer had a fantastic line of defense to make in the Supreme Court. His line of argument was that these bonds and the secrecy is guaranteed under the Constitution. It is guaranteed under the Constitution because this provides, and please hear this carefully, I'm not gone cuckoo as yet. The Constitution provides the right to life to corporates. And if corporates were to reveal who they gave fund to, their life would be threatened. Therefore, under the Constitution, I'm not kidding, these documents are in public domain. Please read them. They do sound as hilarious, but they're ominous in the way that we as journalists never talked about them for so long. On record in the Supreme Court, the government argued that the corporates have a right to life. And the citizens' right to information in this particular case can be subjugated to the life of the corporate, which the government is trying to protect. The court obviously never heard this matter, and the conversation continues. In middle of all this, there was this interpret journalist called Poonam Agarwal, if I'm not mistaken, who works for Quint. Fantastic young journalist who was really curious about what these bonds look like. So somewhere in early 2018, she went and bought one of these bonds. This bond was worth 1,000 rupees. And fortunately still relatively not, I would say by far not spineless. The Quint sent that certificate for forensic audit to look at what does that note really contain. When it came back, the forensic auditors said it contains a secret number which can only be seen under UV light. So you have these special UV lights you put on it, you'll see the number written down. It's a unique number. Poonam raised very valid questions saying, what is this numbering for? You said it cannot be traced, that nobody will ever know who bought, where it bought, who sold to, who it was donated to. Then what is this numbering for? She couldn't get further than that, but she raised very valid question that none of us followed up. We've all dropped the ball on it, except for one journalist in Indian Express who wrote a question to the finance ministry saying, so this numbering, what is it about? So we got the file a year later where everything like this is being dealt with by the government. The government on its record said this secret numbering was to be there from the beginning. This was part of the game. The secret numbering was required essentially so that we can track it from the donor to the donee. In fact, it was there because the rule requires it to be there, because the rules, which again all of us were blind to as journalists particularly were supposed to scrutinize, the rule said that when an enforcement agency of the government wants to know who got it and from whom, they should be having access to that information. Now again, if you step back, forget all this, a standard banking operation. You know, if you transact through a bank, the bank has to keep a check on where the money is going, whose account it is being deposited in. How does the bank do it? I've been a chartered accountant, at least half a failed chartered accountant. Clearly, the bank will note this money came from this, it came against this check number, it went into this account, credit, debit, etc. Records show with us the SBI from day one said these electoral bonds cannot function without a secret numbering. The secret numbering, it said, was essential to keep an audit trail of who bought them and who they were donated to. And the SBI said this was essential because the government told us that any day their enforcement agencies can come and ask us for it. So if we don't have the secret numbering, in fact, SBI went ahead and said, why have it secret? Have it in open. The government said, no, let's keep this secret. The consequence is, who does not know where the money went from and where it came from? You, I, the Election Commission, the income tax officers, unless things change, the RBI, and who does know where the money comes from? All enforcement agencies of the government. And when can they ask for information? The rules are very nicely done. The rules say the enforcement agencies can only get this information when the agencies are investigating a case against any party. It's not as if they're just digging out who got money. I could file a criminal complaint against you as government on some random count and then say, look, just look at all your accounts and bring out all your electoral bonds. That's where we stand. Now, let's step back and say what this has done. Oh, sorry, I also forgot. In 2018, the government didn't get bored enough with this. In 2018 budget, it amended yet another law. And this was a fascinating law which Congress actually helped it do. This law provided that only Indian companies can provide funds to political parties. The BJP government amended it to say international companies or foreign companies which might have a majority share in an Indian company, even those Indian companies can pay, which means an Indian company which is in control of an international entity, on the orders of the international entity, money coming from there or not, can funnel that money through and provide it to a political party. Collectively, if you put this together and say, what do we have today, compared to, remember the picture we had earlier by 2017. What we have is very simple. A limitless tunnel which allows any political party to collect as much money it wants, unaccounted for, accounted for, black, white, from a foreign entity, from an Indian entity, from an unknown entity that nobody knows of, and it can get endless amounts. Now, which party will get this money? Naturally, the party in power, because it is the only one which knows and can know who's donating to whom. The consequences of this were very open in the first tranche itself, when BJP got 96% of the total money that came through electoral bonds. Remember the other limit that was removed of that 2,000 rupees, it was reduced from 20,000 rupees cash to 2,000 rupees cash. Now, what it did in effect was, it opened a complete flood channel for large parties to get money from large corporates and the powerful. But it squeezed and it legalized it. Sorry, I must remember this. This was illegal earlier. What this channel was a legal channel to provide black money and white money and endless money to political parties. On the other hand, the rupees 2000 and below as cash was usually what smaller parties would have benefited from. Young fledgling parties which are just beginning, or small regional parties which are just starting to take off. It squeezed the money for them. It made life difficult for them, and it made life completely happy for the big parties getting endless amounts of money. It broke the two simple principles that should govern electoral funding. One, transparency. It just did away with it. And two, equal opportunity for all political parties to get resources. It's not as if before this we didn't have black money in the election systems. We all know how much is spent. But at least there was a notion that it was illegal. There was at least hope in principle that at least a moral framework which said this is illegal. Today, the government claims this is constitutional, legal, and morally right, and it is done in the name of transparency. Once we had got these documents out, we were expecting a strong response from the government. Obviously, we were silly. The government did not respond strongly for a few days. Obviously, our friends in other media also did not publish it, which is not unnatural. The government came out with a response at the end of fourth day when we were not stopping, and we kept on bringing out story after story referring to the Prime Minister's office, the Finance Minister lying repeatedly. It came out with one line which, if you agree with, it's fine. It said, this is the best transparent form of electoral funding that a government can have. That was its only line of defense. Till date, in the court, with this evidence presented by the petitioners, the government has not denied a single fact out of what I've spoken today to you. It has said all this is true because it's not denied it, and said, but this is transparency. To my mind, this is a strange thing for another reason. Here is a government, and this is better said in Hindi. I thought of it in Hindi. It made sense to me in Hindi, so I'll try and speak in that, and forgive me if some of you may not understand. ये ऐसी सरकार है जो आपसे पूछ रही है आपका वजूद क्या है, आपके माँ और बाप का वजूद क्या है. और ये ऐसी सरकार है जो उसी समय पे बोल रही है कि हम नहीं बताएंगे कि हमारे माई बाप कौन है. अचरज वाली बात है ये वही सरकार है जो आपसे पूछ रही है कि आपने एक उंगली दबा के हमें अपना प्रधान सेवक बनाया था, और ये अब वो नहीं बताएगी कि अपना मालिक किसको मानते हैं. It just does not make sense. And yet, for 2 years, we've just let it happen as if it's gone on. The consequences of this is not just that this was 6,000 crores in 1.5 years, which is equal to the midday meal scheme, etc., etc. That is not the consequence. We've had bigger scams, we know. If you step back and imagine the consequences of this. I mean, I've spent 10, 20 years now looking at corruption in government, and we've been tracking these different corruption cases. All those corruption cases are roughly just symptoms of electoral funding going awry and bad. What is really happening when you see a corruption case? A corruption case is nothing but a businessman having invested in politics, getting his return on the investments in the next 5 years because his horse has won. It's very natural that if I invest as a businessman 100 crores secretly in a politician or a political party, I will look to bring out at least 5 times that. The risks are so high. Any one of you whose business knows the higher the risk, the more profit you need to earn if you win, because if you lose really badly. The rest of the corruption that you see is just a symptom of what used to, at least on paper, happen illegally then. Under the electoral bond scheme, providing black money to political parties, foreign entities paying black money to political parties is now legalized. Therefore, even if it's say 5 years hence, hopefully, I don't have much hope, but if you hope that the Supreme Court might put this law down, you still will not be able to know who paid the BJP 4,000 crores in 1819. anyone who invested 4,000 crores in a business, I'm presuming would like to take a little more than 4,000 crores out of the business at the end. And because he's kept the investment secret, the return will also be secret. The return will obviously be what you think is scams, a little few natural resources gone, some iron mines here, some coal mines there. You don't hear too much about it in this government. Trust me, it happens. The coal scams that you heard of the previous government have happened yet again in this government. We wrote about it, it got killed naturally. But the same mines that the Supreme Court cancelled in 2014 have been reallocated, not auctioned, to private parties for penny less worth. The parties, those companies have not paid more than a couple of 100 crores for those coal mines yet again. There's dozens of other such cases that are available, just that we as journalists have become a new species. It's a species which is vertebrate but lacks a spine. Darwin never imagined this would happen, but we've become that. Yeah, don't clap. It's a very sad, I mean, it's a sad episode. You're laughing at me. It's a black, I mean, to me, it's a very black moment, but there's still hope. And the hope is that while this much money was never made by political parties earlier, there were political parties which at different times have made more than relative money compared to others, and yet they have lost elections. Money does bring a great amount of influence, but it does not win over electorate when it gets down on the streets and realizes what's happening. So I'm not so cynical about that this means that a party which has done this will continue to be in power endlessly. I don't think so. But what it does do is that all those trolls, all those advertisements, the party in power can now endlessly fund all this and fund it legally. What used to be given, as I remember in the earlier days of this government, as 200 rupees cash to the volunteers to troll us, can now be given by check at a substantial more amount. You as citizens can be trolled for presenting your views in public domain by people paid by check by a party. And that is a difficult task to handle, to imagine that this is where our democracy is leading. Let me spend 5 minutes on what would perhaps be an imagined alternative. Again, there could be an ideal where only the citizens pay the political parties. A proposal that I recently read that Professor Gowda of Congress in his independent capacity has put out conceptually sounded interesting to me. He said, no artificial legal entity should contribute to political parties. Only individuals should be allowed to do so. Each individual should actually be empowered to do so. So even the poor who do not have money perhaps can be given money to contribute to any candidate or political party they wish. Every penny that a political party collects should be available to us for scrutiny of who gave and how much. It can be done through an electoral trust is what he's proposed. Seems reasonable. One can at least debate about it. And anyone who wants to give above a certain amount can also continue giving as long as he and she show it in their income tax records, put it out in public, and the political party says X, Y, and Z has given us 2,000 crores out of the goodness of his or her heart. It's quite fair if they want to do it. To me, it meets the basic principles of transparency. It meets the basic principles of saying only citizens should be empowered, empowering their politicians to become elected representatives. But we are very far away from that point right now. We are in that dark zone where, again, and I need to repeat this because I can't believe that we've come to this point where this is true, but it's an illegal channel allowing infinite amounts of black money to be legally provided to the party in power. Imagine where we go with this. Imagine how much you as citizens voting, where you are rendered in that scheme of things. If I was to get an investment, and as a journalist, I see this very well, because as journalism, We've been funded so much by the advertisers, we've never bothered about our readers. You're turning your democracy into the kind of journalism we have in India today. Because your democracy will be funded by advertisers, it will obviously only respond to them and not to you. It anyway didn't respond much to the minorities and much to the marginal communities in India. But you who think are in the middle class, actually are the elite, even you would be rendered really minuscule in this game. Because a few corporates could provide enough that you could not as a collective in your whole lifetimes or even all the times you vote to a leader, a political leader. And naturally, that political leader would therefore, for the rest of his or her life, owe allegiance to that one unknown entity within or outside this country. In most other countries, governments would fall for this. In some countries, they have fallen for trying to do this. In our place, in our country, in these times, it's called.
So, and raised a red flag against it. So, why yesterday Supreme Court of India declined to stay electoral?
The answer can be simple. I'm as puzzled as you are. The simple principle that I know of jurisprudence of why something can be put on hold temporarily at least is that you will not go down a line that you cannot come back from. You will not end up doing something that a court believes prima facie might be wrong, and you can prevent it or at least hold it so far. A stay is given when you normally, I think courts believe that giving a stay will not disenfranchise anyone's interests. It will just put a matter on pause. To my mind, and I think to a lot of people, this case was completely up there for a stay, if not a final call. Nobody's life would get damaged. No political party would be less or better off if you believe the government that this is equal opportunity for everyone to get secret funds. Why the Supreme Court did not do this is equal to asking why did the Supreme Court not hear to what's happening in Kashmir. I think the matter is of equal seriousness, and if a court cannot bother to talk better about immediate threat to lives and restrictions on lives of our citizens, perhaps in current times it seems easier for courts to not give a stay on this as well.
Yeah. Sir, I have a simple doubt. So when the corporates are buying these bonds, obviously they will be buying by through check or something, and it becomes traceable. You are calling it as black money. Does it, will the corporates take a risk of investing something which is easily traceable as black money? I think some money which is being bought, it's again coming back to the mainstream in one way or other, in the form of expenditure of the election, political parties' expenditure.
And his finance ministers repeatedly have used to fool us. Let's go back to this conversation. I'm sure you've had this before. What is black money? Black money is not colored black. It is not cash. It is money on which some entity has not paid the tax he or she should have paid under Indian laws, right? It's money that's been hidden. It's money that is hidden in a bank account or outside bank account. In a bank account outside India or in India. This is when Prime Minister Modi and his finance minister repeatedly referred to something called shell companies. In fact, they came out with press releases saying how many shell companies we've taken care of and closed them down because they were being used to funnel black money. So you can move black money in India through checks and demand drafts. It's not because it's check, it's clean, and if it's cash, it's dirty. Anything that is untaxed, and I as a chartered accountant at some point actually saw this very close. Calcutta used to be the hub of where innumerable these shell companies were created which had no business. Now imagine a company which actually does no business, has never worked, has no employees, yet is donating 1,000 crores to a political party. Clearly that money is not correct. It's coming from somewhere. And you can create enough layers of these companies, company after company, that you cannot track down where this money came from. The only person who perhaps can, the only entity who can perhaps do it is the government, which means the party in power, which means the only one who can come to know whether this is black money or not is the party in power, and nobody else will. Therefore, again, the principles of transparent funding of electoral functions is destroyed in this process. This is why the 7.5% of the net profit limit was there, to make sure only profit earning companies which have survived for 3 years provide some funds. You could say this could be increased to 10% or 5%. But we must remember black money is not money in cash. Black money can lie, and most of it does lie in assets, in real estate, in bank accounts, which is moved around freely without us as citizens being able to track. Government sometimes just being unwilling to track, even if
Who are
it can.
protesting against CAA, who are not protesting against this, where they have very much stake in this, their entire life depends on these electoral bonds, where they can never come into the power because
Congress
of
has also opposed these bonds, but they've also taken donations through these bonds. Then, then where is the moral ground for them to object to it? It's a pretty valid question if you think on the principle. On a principle base, it's very right. Two, to respond to your specific question, I really don't know what opposition we have in this country, frankly, for last 6 years. If we had better opposition, we would have done much better. It would not have needed people like me to come after 2 years digging this out, or Commodore Lokesh Batra to bring out these documents. We would have presumed if they were working as robust opposition, they would have brought this out. But regardless, I mean, that's a sad episode in our democracy, but that is what it is. The more moot question perhaps is Congress, which also collects funds. I think they've collected 350 crores in 18-19 through electoral bonds. What moral right do they have? On the face of it, looks okay. They should not crib about it because they're also taking money. But you look at it this way instead. The BJP in power has tilted the football field against you in the first place. And then you say you don't even play the game to begin with, which means you're never going to come into power. Principally, the Congress can turn around, and I agree with this position, though they've not elucidated it publicly, saying, while this is legal, we will take it, but we will continue to oppose it in the courts and in public processes, and we would like it to go away. I think there's a fair line to take. It may be not the best principled line to take, like the left has said, that we'll not even take it. But it's a pragmatic line to take. You cannot become a party which does not have funds to fight a party that keeps on accumulating funds, supposedly legally, but completely immorally and endlessly. You clearly will lose the battle. I think a political party's job is also to remain in the position to fight off. I think it's a pragmatic decision. Some disagree with me, and it's fine. But, yeah, sorry. I mean, your earlier question is much more fun. Why did the political parties not oppose it? I think there's some pragmatism to that, that things that impact our lives, our existence physically, obviously rile us up and bring us out on the streets far faster than something so opaque. It's almost like when you get taxed income tax, you react faster, but when you get taxed indirectly through GST, you do not even realize money is going out of your pockets. So electoral bond is something like that. It's money eaten out of us. It's money taken away from us, fed to political parties. Something I've forgotten, if I might take a minute. The electoral bond is such a hilariously stupid process. It's such a fraud upon us. Now, imagine an electoral bond is basically you giving money to him as a donation. It's a transaction between two private entities. Normally, if you did this through a check process, you wanted to create a demand draft in a bank, the bank would charge you a commission on top of, for every 1,000 rupees, it'll charge you 10 rupees, right? It would go from one of the two parties. In this case, in the electoral bonds case, for a political party taking secret money from a company, we pay the commission as citizens. The SBI charges the Consolidated Fund of India a commission on every time a political party gets a donation. This is how ridiculous it is. But it's a transparent.
In the politics, if not by political parties, most of the individuals who are spending 20 to 30 crores in the elections, which is causing much more damage than electoral bonds where parties are putting money. So here the grassroots level, right persons are not getting to the politics is the one of the main reason for the right persons are sitting here and discussing, doing nothing. So that is the biggest problem India is facing. So what we request is, if you take down the money in the politics, so many right candidates will come into the politics. So can you push light on those areas if possible?
Amount of average money spent by a rich candidate, it can range from anywhere between 4 crores to 100 crores. The overall amount of black money that comes through cash systems is pretty high. Bonds at the moment is, we believe, a small part of it. It will continue to grow till it becomes a bigger part. But I think there's a way to visualize this differently. Right now what we do and what the Election Commission does is it sends these roughly equivalent of inspectors, school teachers, etc., scurrying around the entire country looking for किसने कितनी चाय पिलाई है, कितने मोटरसाइकिल चल रहे हैं, वो रैली में 30 गाड़ियाँ थी कि 35 गाड़ियाँ थी. That's just not the way to go after controlling money in politics. Again, we have very artificial caps on how much money must be spent on politics and elections. A 50 lakh cap in a country with high densities in some places, low densities in other places, large geographies to cover. We are not Europe. We are not any of those countries where population densities are low, access to citizenry is easy. We are a multi-party system. I think there needs to be a realism about how much parties need to spend. But what we should have is that every damn penny they spend is accounted for. And the accounting has to begin from the point of supply, not from the point of expenditure. Because that's endless. How many cups of tea will any government track across the country sold during election period? How many rallies held, etc.? The point of catching this and controlling and opening it to transparency is the point of supply. If you do that, I think it's fine. I mean, to my mind, it's fine if a political party spends a lot more than what we morally believe is good, because you just cannot keep a check on that. You cannot create an artificial market by pure economic logic. You can create several layers of transparency. You can create a layer of transparency towards citizenry. You can create a layer of transparency towards parliament. You can create a complete new layer of transparency by full audit of all reports and all annual accounts of all political parties that stand in election. We don't have that. Let's have an open audit, just like we have for a public sector unit. Because it's going to be our money, citizenry's money given to political parties to run, therefore we can legally, constitutionally have a right to audit their accounts. And it shall not be there for a private account. There's ways to do it. I think the ways of saying artificial caps on expenditure and checking on expenditures done by parties during election is not a very efficient way. It's a very inefficient way of keeping a check on them. Maybe you can have that as a supplementary, but that cannot be the main route of managing it. Is this final? I mean, even if we got this, do you think this will solve all the problems? Perhaps not. But you'd at least be far, far away from the nonsense we have in place today. We are right now in dark ditches. We just need to begin with crawl out, and then we can start talking about transparency as we know it in the dictionary rather than as this government knows it. There's not much to say to that. Anyone who can write on file saying this is illegal but let's do it as an exception really is spineless. So are we. Our job was to make sure this never happened. Our job was as journalists to make sure that it did not go on for 2 years unchecked, that you should have known this in the first few months itself. We all failed as journalists whose job was to bring this out. Imagine it took a 70-plus-year-old Commodore Lokesh Batra to interpretedly get this out. I didn't. I should have been paid to do this. Journalists should have been paid to do this job. A retired Commodore got it out. Thankfully, he knew the ways of the government because he had worked for a while in the government. So he knew what games they play. We were fortunate that a collective of us was helped read these documents over months. There were 900 pages of it to begin with. We were supported by citizens like you who said, do it. I can promise you this fantastic set of journalists out there who, if supported, could do this 40 times over. Just that we don't have the ability in the current system of journalism to do this work for you more often. I mean, if in normal times, you imagine this would not be called an investigation. All somebody did was file a 10 rupee RTI, get a document and read it and tell you what it said. In normal circumstances, the government would have not put this down on record. Nobody would have put down on record saying the Prime Minister ordered the breaking of law. I mean, investigations is where we've got threats towards our life, where we've gone out, dug documents that you could not get under any other circumstances. Those are investigations. These are supposed to be routine stories. And now I'm ashamed when you people and citizens and readers come up to and said, so brave. This is not supposed to be brave. This is supposed to be everyday journalism, hopefully. Inshallah, it will be again. But I think you as readers, as citizens need to and I'm taking it away from the issue of electoral bonds, need to distinguish between opinion and reportage. A lot of us help support opinion which we agree with principally. We do not as citizens, even empowered, entitled, rich citizens, distinguish between pure reportage which allows you to form opinions. If this set of documents had not come out, we would continue to believe what Mr. Jaitley said on the floor of the House. Look for whoever you believe actually does pure reportage, just brings out fresh set of information. Help them. That is supposed to be the core base of journalism. Unfortunately, that is almost dead. What's remaining is a few anchors, a few opinion writers who we agree with, so we think they're liberal. The others think they agree with them, so they think those are the right ones. But the base job was to just present facts to you guys. I mean, I did not need to tell you what's right and wrong. All I needed to do was tell you these are the dates, this is what happened. I'm sure most of you have sorted out about how transparent this transparency. Government has done is basically caught the owners and editors of media houses by their necks, squeeze the life out of them. Even if I never got access to parliament. I never go, in 20 years, I've never entered parliament for work. I've never reported on parliament. Yet, today technology and a little bit of spine allows you to get everything you want. Access is not essential. What is essential is ability, support to keep at it, to get information that we as journalists need. It's there. I can promise you, we've had hilarious episodes where sources, even in this government, you would not imagine it's possible, sources inside this government running around newsrooms saying, please take this leaked report and publish it. And newspapers saying, no, no, no. And poor chaps, they've been running around for months, coming from one newsroom to the other, saying, will anyone publish it? Not even saying what you write on it, saying, just take these papers, make whatever sense you want out of it. And news organizations saying, no, no, we don't do this. The moment you have badly funded electoral systems, you've institutionally created the generation of black money as a mechanism that will run the economy of the country. The moment you get unaccounted for money in electoral politics, you actually created a structural economy which is meant to generate black money for a few people. A substantial way of reducing the use of black money in our economy is to take it out of politics. The moment that goes out, and it goes out of the hands and powers of those who govern, you will find that those who govern are able to go after black money. If you're funded by black money, how will you go after it? If you're funded by foreign entities and unaccounted for money, how will you go after it? You fundamentally weakened your space.
No, I just want to give you I don't know about north of Maharashtra, but south of Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and maybe Kerala. The average expense for a Lok Sabha election for a Lok Sabha candidate is around 30 to 35 crores. In some lovely constituencies, it will be as high as 50 to 80 crores. The party funds between 5 to 7 crores. The remaining money comes from his private enterprise, his ability to raise money amongst his friends, the money he makes out of real estate which he had made and which is actually punting, because there will be 3 candidates, only 1 candidate will win. And this is the kind of money that is spent. So the solution you are suggesting, not the solution, one of the solutions you are suggesting is auditing the political party. And so that will somehow we will get an insight into that 5 to 7 crores which they contribute. But the remaining 35 to 40 crores is still a black hole. And plugging that is also a challenge. And that is a large sums of money, because once he has invested 40 to 50 crores, he has to recover 41 to 51 crores.
It's not as if other countries have not done it. It's not great science. You club the money that a candidate spends into the political party's accounts. Every penny he spends is clubbed into the political party's account. You collectively audit it. Will it still provide leakage? Perhaps yes. But at least we have to, I don't think I'm presenting the perfect solution. This is perhaps 1/3 or 1/4 of what needs to be done. There must be several other tools that need to be required. But if you have a government which is funded by corporates secretly and illegally, to my mind it's still illegal even though we have a law, we are not even going to begin on that path of discussing this correctly. Fundamentally, at least we must have a terminology that calls it all this illegal. Just make sure if a minister reaches there, if one day we can catch hold of a minister with this kind of money, we can take him out of the system or take her out of the system. We can pull down a government which does this. If that is not there, even as a principle, and is instead sold off as constitutionally valid, we are moving in a completely different direction than the direction you want us to move towards, where we discuss this further and further and refine this. No country has achieved it perfectly. US does not have a perfect system also. It also has great lobbying. But at least we come to know who's lobbying there. We don't even, now we have a system where we'll not even come to know who's made our lives miserable. Who run our, we don't even come to know who runs our democracy really. At least right now we had a notion of who runs it. And that's running completely in another direction, running really fast. We've collected 6,000 crores and each tranche we've collected more than the previous tranche through electoral bonds. And we collected at a time when our economy was tanking. You would think when larger corporates are facing crunch, you would think they'd donate less. Strangely, corporates seem to be donating more.
Outside in the country and all, and becomes a legal currency again. Are we sure that the entire amount is being spent for election purpose, or the major chunk of it is again becoming black and going into illegal and unsocial activities?
Logically, I would think the problem is when they want to buy advertisement across newspapers, endless amount of advertisement on random television channels, even run their television own channels these days, as we've heard recently. Then they don't have enough white money. They have enough black money that individual candidates have, but they're not able to buy hundreds crores worth of ads every day. So most of this is actually, in our belief, black money being turned white and then being used to bought advertisements and influence officials or building headquarters of your party.
To find out which country has near to perfect electoral funding process, sir.
Provided to the government. There's several countries which have several big democracies in emerging economies, in developing countries and in developed countries. Election Commission's view, and so was ours, that each one of them does better than us right now. No country has electoral bonds. And this is submitted by the Election Commission and the RBI on record to the Supreme Court, that no other country in the world does this nonsense as we are doing. To me, at least, that's clear. Again, we will have a unique formula that we cannot adopt from other countries, I think, because the kind of densities, the kind of population, the kind of heterogeneity we have in our society, most other democracies don't face that challenge. So we'll have to devise our own formulas. But again, my request is at least let's start moving in that direction. We've gone in the other direction entirely.
My question is very simple. I know I'm asking a stupid question. What can we do? I mean, what as an individual do you ask your fellow brothers and sisters of India to do regarding this, like electoral bonds and all the scams they are coming up with?
Able to write this is the day we actually slept very well. A bunch of us. There are several people who helped us get this through that I can't name, within the government, outside, journalists who are locked down in institutions where they can't write with freedom. I lost my job, so I got my freedom by losing my job. A bunch of us who slept so happily once we got this out, because we'd been working on it for 3 months. We were scared. We saw editors and publishers running away. And most of us, we were very thankful to a bunch of publications in different languages coming forth and doing what most publications in New Delhi, which call themselves national publications, feared to even copy-paste after we had published it. There was a bunch of them, and to see them actually come together in a fashion that we thought was impossible, where random editors of regional, very established regional news organizations came forth, did not budge for a second under pressure and kept on publishing day after day. The moment we saw that, I think a bunch of us slept happily knowing it's still possible, we can still do our journalism. I think that for me, and this ability of, we are a continent-sized country, and to see us operate as a continent across languages, to see that our resilience lies in our heterogeneity, in our differences, was for me quite easily the night that we slept happy, saying, enough going. It does not matter what happens in Delhi. There's enough resilience in all of us across the country to keep things on track, or at least bring them on track eventually. I don't care how bad it is compared to 77. That cannot be the benchmark. Our benchmark is that we need to get better than what I was yesterday. It cannot be what it was 10 years ago or 3,000 years ago, or where we came from, what were we doing at that time, was one community fighting each other 2,000 years ago or not. That's not the benchmark on which you build your future. You're locking yourselves down to a history and fooling yourselves. Our job is to move ahead and move towards an ideal that exists right there as an ideal. Does not matter what we were yesterday. If 77 we had it worse, fine, we had it worse. I really don't give a damn. What do we do saying that? I mean, what's that benchmark saying? They shut down 4 papers, these guys just threatened 4 papers. The fact is journalism is not happening. The fact is the democracy is getting crunched down in a fashion it should not be. Was the previous regime corrupt? Yes, it was. Therefore, does that legitimize that these guys do 70% less or 10% less? No. You hold the current government responsible to the highest standard that a democracy should hold any government responsible to. You work towards an ideal. I'm not a student of history, and I'm in some ways very glad that I do not get into this debate about how bad we were 20 years ago. We might have been. Who knows? That's not the place to look forward, not your generation. Let the old people reminisce about, हाँ हमारे ज़माने में भी हुआ था. You can't be reminiscing about what happened and what did not happen. I think the government fools us by constantly pitching this to us, of reminding us once of some random golden bird, and then of random dark eras and random invaders. अल्लाह थे यार, अगर थे भी तो थे, हम तो वो नहीं हैं, हमें तो आगे देखना है. हाँ, you live this moment or your next moment. So these benchmarks, it really bores me, this exercise of saying, do we remember emergency के era में क्या होता था? होता होगा, इससे बहुत बुरा हुआ होगा. I don't care. I was 2 years old then. I will not want it to happen to my daughter. And that is the only thing.
Not just in the area that you spoke about, but every single day we see how many steps backwards we've taken in several areas, including autonomy of institutions. In fact, what you spoke today directly hits at the base of our democracy. So, black money, dark days, sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Yet, I'm very glad that you ended your talk on a very hopeful note. Can you tell us what is your hope based on, apart from the groundswell of protests that we see across the country and people coming together and questioning this government that they were scared of? The fear has gone. What do you base your hope on?
If you fear what happens, you step out. All of us step out. I think all of us have this breach point after which it just gets too much. And then there's nothing much to do except walk and do the right thing. Part of my life, my family is in Arunachal. Part of my life is in Manipur. We've seen much worse times over the last decades. We've seen things that are happening in what we call mainland India now, where lives are threatened, where police takes on brute force. We've seen this for decades. People haven't given up there. We've not won our battles, but we continue to fight against much worse situations where AFSPA is in place, where brutality is pretty much normal for decades now. Thousands of our people and children have been killed in this process. Yet we can't give up, and we don't. I don't see why we should give up. Where do you go if you give up? You only walk ahead and you fight. After it gets too tiring, you stand up and you do the right thing. So maybe because it's coming too close to us in our personal lives, it's impacting us for whatever reasons. We see our children now out on the streets protesting against something which is, again, calamitous if it happens. There is no other way. I mean, somebody was asking me before this saying, but why do you do this journalism when you keep losing your job? After a point, you realize there is no other way. Where do you go back home? How do you sleep happy? You sleep happy because you fought a battle that had to be fought, regardless of whether you lose it or not. I think a lot of people are recognizing there is, I don't think these protests that you see on the street now, if I was to do pop psychology nonsense, it's not just reflective of each individual of them feeling clobbered by what's coming on. But I think a lot of them have felt the pressure of this claustrophobic atmosphere that's been created in the last few years. I think a lot of them are reacting to that. It's a build-up. Maybe this wave will die out. We don't know. But I cannot see how a democracy which is so vibrant, which is so heterogeneous, which has so much immense power because it is heterogeneous, that it can be squashed so easily. It's just not possible. Maybe it'll last longer than our lifetimes, we don't know. Maybe it'll die out tomorrow or in the next elections. But after you're done with cynicism, there's only hope. I think I'm done with cynicism. It's too long ago.
Respected sir, money. And from 89 onwards, I'm watching elections. More and more money. For example, in the recent 2019 Andhra elections, every party, both Telugu Desam, not all parties, both Telugu Desam and YSRCP, paid 1,500 rupees each for vote in many constituencies. Why this degeneration has come and how to stop this degeneration?
Look at it proportionately. Compared to what was the size of our economy in 1984, 1977, the size of economy we have today. If you look at it proportion to that, actually the amount of money that's going into election has not increased proportionately enough. We could be far more corrupt in this process. We've been reasonably okay. Very often we've got checks and balances of, again, governments that have, or parties that have spent a lot of money have lost elections regardless. In this state, in other states, in other places. Money is an issue. It is a serious issue. But I don't think it's the only thing that runs elections even today. There is great resilience, as I said, in our electoral processes. There is great resilience in our citizenry to respond, maybe a little late at times, maybe post facto. Another part which I really love is the fact that most citizenry has not depended on journalism to tell it what's right and wrong. Most often, we as journalists have followed citizenry in reacting better. Most good things that have happened in our Indian democracy did not happen because of the support of journalism. They happened despite our ignorance. The social movements you've seen, the Dalit rising of the Dalit communities, the empowerment of what communities that were subjugated was not because we had progressive writing in media. Most of it was pretty deranged writing. Yet, we as citizens have regardless built ourselves better over time. I think there again there is hope. While I as a professional can feel miserable about where my profession stands today, I still think it's much better than where it was 20 years ago. At least you'll find 20 young journalists trying to go out doing this thing despite their editors stopping them to. And stepping out, having complete impatience with the system about what they want to do. I think we are moving ahead. It's obviously great work in progress. We are an unevenly spread country, unevenly historically disadvantaged country. The challenge is big, but it's not insurmountable, and I don't think we've done really badly so far. We can do much better, and we should progress, but it's not such a dangerous game so far.
Sir, in this, in our democracy, by the politicians, so, and people are also getting co-opted into the corruption. We find nowadays, earlier it used to be said that the lower down, they were given money. Now we are finding middle class also is taking money, and rich people anyway, they are partners in the process. So how do, and also we are finding a lot of intimidation, brazenness, white lies being told officially, ministers lying in the parliament. So how do we come out of this?
That well, and I will not even try. But I can say that one thing that I found egregious in what you stated it's not as if the middle class is now getting corrupt. Whatever you call the middle class is actually the elite. If you look at pure statistics of the economics, we are the elite. Most of us sitting here would be the elite by far compared to rest of the population. Most of us indirectly and directly have benefited from the corruption more than all the other poor put together as a collective. What sometimes you see as poor people getting 1500 rupees to vote, you can also imagine that as actually an informal way of redistributing wealth, because the poor only has opportunity in this bad electoral system to get something out of the politician when elections come around. Is that a good way? No. But it is a distribution of wealth in some ways. So I think that 1500 rupees and a mixie being given to a poor person to vote is not what I'm really bothered about. Is the big corporates, is those big entities that govern our economy, that take natural resources and turn them into profit-making exercises for them, is what we need to keep a lookout for. And we need to keep a lookout for what we do as the elites. I think our poor have done pretty well. They either did not get the opportunity enough or have shown great resilience in the face of a really bad democracy to continue to work honestly and get an honest wage.
Two more questions. Yeah.
A hint from your speech regarding a technical clue you have left. There's a number which can be traced by a UV light on an electoral bond. I have a technical question. Like there is an instrument that is running in the banking sector called second channel. You would have probably understood through your investigation, where actually a black money or unaccounted money or unaudited money can be stashed in with non-KYC process, which is well heard and which is already banking system is established in that process, providing this service to many people. And do you think the electoral bond is one of the components picked up from this second channel process through which actually a non-KYC bonds can be issued to individuals to fund the electoral process? And the second thing is an historical reference I want to talk about. Chanakya is popular for Ardhashastra. Do you think the Chanakya of BJP has devised this concept of electoral bond?
Do we know who's devised it? Actually, as an individual, we don't. What we have, and I forgot to tell this, when we were looking through these records, we found an anonymous page advising the government to set up something like this. We know that that page came from outside the government. It was some private entity that gave it to the government. We've not been able to reach out to who did it. But whoever did it does not deserve phrases like Chanakya. It's somebody defrauding your democracy. Clearly, Chanakya did not want to do that. So let's get our vocabulary right. Just in case we forget, sorry, I forgot. On the 25th or 26th, somewhere around in the next 10 days, we'll produce yet more evidence on the electoral bonds. We haven't given up. Again, this is what drives hope. Commodore Lokesh Batra filed the first set of RTIs, got these documents out. Ever since, charged and energized by the fact that we were able to bring it out, somebody could name the Prime Minister's office and the Finance Minister. Bunch of other people have gone around and filed RTIs. We'll bring those out in the next few days, and we promise we'll keep bringing them out till it's possible. It will be possible. Several organizations, including Upwork.
And corruption in the electoral funding. As you said in earlier, that you don't care if a poor man gets 1500 rupees, you are more worried about the corporates. Now, above corporates, there are hedge funds. No one knows how they work. So the more complexity we add to our financial market, these things will become more murkier.
To deal with it, to my mind, is very simple. Take all artificially created legal entities out of the process. Let only citizens fund politics. Then you can have as much hedge funds, venture capital funds, funneling systems, corporate whales. You can protect elections to some degree from it. The moment you get into saying, yes, I will allow this kind of company and not that kind of company, then you hit that problem of saying, you don't know where that money really comes from. Then you get into all these chains of saying, do I go to Panama and look for money coming from there? Do I go to Singapore or not? The moment you take artificial entities out, I think you can have those financial markets and derivatives working, and you can keep politics relatively safe from it, because it's the individual's income tax assessment which will tell why he or she paid 100 crores to a politician, and you can haul them up far faster.
Electoral bond has come, they have collected about 6,200 crores. So before that, it's 2017 or so, what was the electoral fund which was collected normally? Is it it has increased phenomenally, or it's not?
Sure, BJP electoral bonds running, it has doubled the amount of money it has collected in a single year. So in just 1 year, it was able to double the amount of money it was collecting. And all of this now was obviously anonymous compared to previously, where it was disclosing about some of the funding that it was getting.
The finance minister, before stating that it is given exception.
Yeah, that was the law. You're right.